paradise of Hong Kong. We're so pleased to welcome you to our beautiful home. Come enjoy a natural wonderland to which we've added the world's finest resort facilities, a spectacular amusement park, and succulent seafood. Come relax and let us refresh your body and spirit.
天气开会走位，靠近安全带，请便请您回到座位靠近在安全带，谢谢。
All my life I had heard people complaining about their experiences on airplanes, but mine was awesome. I got to watch movies, had a ton of leg room, ate some pretty good food, got an insane view, and the toilet even sucked poo good. This was my first flight ever, aside from when I was 4 years old, but essentially my first time ever getting into an airplane. And I was going all the way across the world. I can see my house from here. Oh, and my ears popped. From what I understand, a lot of people get nervous about turbulence or their plane crashing, but considering the place I was going, I felt pretty safe in the plane.
One of the world's busiest airports has been thrown into chaos for the second straight day.
Something's going on over here, and you can see a number of people running in to the airport.
Hong Kong International Airport once again canceled dozens of flights due to what officials say are massive disruptions by anti-government protesters.
We're not quite sure what's happening at this point, and you can see the riot police outside the window right there, now running towards the entrance.
Tensions reached a fever pitch there, with angry and weary travelers shouting at demonstrators over the disarray.
There are people who are waiting to get on a flight.
Hong Kong's embattled chief executive says the city is on the brink of no return.
First thing you should know, be wary of the media. Language changes depending on how they want to frame a situation. With a few taps on the keyboard, they can go from talking about pro-democracy protesters to
massive disruptions by anti-government protesters.
And a situation where protesters are yelling at police can easily become
angry and weary travelers shouting at demonstrators over the disarray.
Watching something without knowing the biases being presented is like wandering through a labyrinth. The deeper you go, the harder it is to get out. And before you know it, their bias is now yours. Anyway.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Hong Kong.
Bear in mind, this is an international airport. There are passengers here, just downstairs in the arrivals department. This is one of the world's busiest airports. This is not somewhere that you expect riot police to be coming into.
Whoa, anime titties.
There are passengers, as you mentioned, still in the airport.
You can still see people arriving at this airport. This is, as you can see, a normal functioning airport.
Okay, which way?
And this is an amazing juxtaposition of what is happening at this airport, with people walking around with their luggage.
There are families arriving in Hong Kong, coming home, coming for a holiday. It is simply surreal.
Must not be any protests today. Lucky me, I guess.
It is chaos. Last year, in fact, Kate, this was the 8th busiest airport in the world.
Find a taxi. So, have you seen Chef? Alright, so let me clarify a few things. This Airbnb where I spent my first night, Might seem a bit small, right? Well, by Hong Kong standards, that's pretty good. You see, Hong Kong has the most expensive real estate market in the world. A fact that really isn't the result of a natural demand, but rather the artificial inflation of land's value by the government. You see, the Hong Kong government owns all of the land in Hong Kong, aside from this church, which the British claimed when Hong Kong was one of their colonies. But other than that, the Hong Kong government owns it all. Now, of course, you can open up a private business or live in your own home, but if you're buying it from the government, you're actually not buying it, you're leasing it for sometimes over 99 years. Which might be a bit hard to understand, but essentially, the government leases their land to the highest bidder.
More and more of them coming from mainland China with lots of money will duke it out in these auctions, and will end up at an astronomically high price.
And this method of constantly making a ton of money from leasing their land allows the government to maintain extremely low tax rates. Part of the reason why Hong Kong is the business hub of the world. Corporations are very attracted to places with low tax rates. But so the fundamental problem, right, is that the Hong Kong government makes a ton of money by leasing this land. And when they make more of it available, the scarcity goes down, and therefore, their land becomes worth technically less per square foot. And this has resulted in just a ton of green land being maintained that could be used to house millions of Hong Kongers, but is instead left undeveloped. A situation that is pretty bad for the average residents of Hong Kong. Young people have almost no hope of moving out of their parents' apartments until they're in their late 20s. And even so, most of them would end up living in a place about this size and with a bunch of roommates. And in the most extreme cases, people are actually living in cage homes. Bruh. Imagine paying almost 200 USD to live in a cage. Wait, scratch that. Imagine living in a cage at all. But for many Hong Kongers, it's just a reality. Alright, now that I got you nice and depressed, let me explain the purpose of this series a little bit. While the prospect of taking down a government or a country through a series of criticism videos is perhaps attractive, I'd be incredibly naive if I didn't acknowledge that that's not what this series is about. All I can realistically do is chronicle my experience, and try my best to pass on what I've seen and what I've learned. The series will start with my perspective as a foreigner, and will build toward the perspectives of those involved in the protests. I'll be trying my best to preserve everything as factually as possible, but if any clarification or correction is necessary, you'll be able to find that in the pinned comment or description of each video. Glad that's over with. Now, let me begin this riveting tale of tourism by talking about the extremely exciting subject of... Oh! That's a spider. That's a spider on my hand. What the fuck? Hong Kong is basically divided into 3 zones. There's Hong Kong Island, the most wealthy area and the one most influenced by the British during their over 150-year dominion. Here you can just tell, people are made of money and the scenery is extreme. Nightly light shows, expensive restaurants, fashion outlets, architecture, clubs, bars, banks, it has a lot. Then there's Kowloon. You'll notice it's separated from Hong Kong Island by a body of water. While this divide is literal, it's also somewhat symbolic, because this area remains somewhat separate from Hong Kong Island in the sense that Hong Kong culture has been better preserved here. Food is less expensive and much more authentic, but safety, sanitary, and overall living standards are much lower. If Hong Kong Island is synthetic polish, then Kowloon is authentic grime. The new territories, while definitely making up a larger surface area, are not super relevant to this series, and is largely green space maintained by the government. It's basically the suburbs of Hong Kong, where you can go to hike, fish, or relax at the beach. Each of these zones has multiple districts inside of them, and I'll introduce you to those as we go. But now let's talk about transportation is one of Hong Kong's specialties, and it's small enough that you can get almost anywhere in pretty fashionable time. You can take a bus, a taxi, a tram, a string cheese, a cable car, you can drive if you're a millionaire, and you can even take a boat, or a ferry, or whatever. Unlike where I come from, the price of a taxi in Hong Kong is actually more affordable than an Uber. The only problem is a lot of taxi drivers are pricks. But if your taxi driver kicks you out for doodling dicks in the dust on his dashboard, you're in luck, because most places are within walking distance. And if you're really in a rush, well, then you can always take the Mass Transit Railway, otherwise known as the MTR. This high-speed subway system is the most efficient in the world. If you were to put it and my dad against each other to see who would pick me up from school first, it would probably win. I haven't seen my dad in 6 years. But seriously, this thing is the peak of efficiency. There are higher odds that the sun will not come up in the morning than one of these puppies coming late. It honestly puts every other subway to shame. I can miss my train and not even worry because another one will be there in 3 minutes. That's the level of efficiency we're dealing with. Upwards of 75% of Hong Kong's population uses this thing every day. In fact, they're so confident in their service that if a train is ever 31 minutes late, they'll pay the equivalent of 129,000 American dollars to the government. But yeah, we'll check back with it in a future video. For now, let me show you some of the cool places that it brought me.